So one of my not-so-secret vices over these last 2 years has been a subscription to Netflix, probably like some of you here, and watching various series and films. Some of them have been utterly engrossing and beautiful, like Shtisel, a series that draws you into the lives of a Haredi family living in Jerusalem, and in particular, the young, sensitive, and talented artist Akiva. Other series or films I have abandoned after the first 10 minutes or watched because they were recommended by others. More recently, over a number of days, and this was recommended by one of our members, I managed to make it through the movie Don't Look Up, although I must admit I had to break it down into 20-minute chunks. I couldn't bear to watch it all in one go. As far as cinematic artistry goes, it's a terrible film, but perhaps that shouldn't put you off if you haven't seen it. The film, if you haven't seen it, I won't give any spoilers, don't worry, begins with a young PhD scientist in an observatory at Michigan State University discovering a comet that is hurling towards Earth and will collide with and destroy everything on Earth just 6 months, in 6 months' time. Pandemonium breaks out, and when she asks her professor, an over-anxious Leonardo DiCaprio, who is subsequently seduced by fame and a TV host played by Kate Blanchett on a program called The Daily Rip, to confirm the prediction that the Earth and all living things will be utterly destroyed by the comet. The scientists must now convince the narcissistic president of the United States, played by Meryl Streep, and her acolytes, who include her boorish son Jason, the country's chief of staff, to wake up and take note. I don't know what to say that is good about the film, except that I don't think it's supposed to be a good film in the sense of telling a complex story or conveying a subtle message. There's nothing subtle about this film, or indeed about any of the characters, bar one, a young, sensitive, spiritual fellow for whom prayer at a critical moment helps to elevate the human condition and our response to tragedy for one fleeting moment towards the end. If you have seen the film or even read about it, you will know that the whole film is an allegory, a metaphor for the climate catastrophe. The comet is a ticking time bomb that represents our trajectory towards extinction of the Earth and the human species. Without giving away any spoilers, this is a film that screams loudly at us about our refusal to face the inevitable consequences of what we are doing to the world. I don't recommend watching it for its artistic merits, but perhaps if you haven't seen it, watch it for its piercing and anguished message that we can no longer ignore or be indifferent to the environmental devastation we are facing even now. I think the film also has an underlying question at its heart, and that is whether the human species is even capable of turning itself around and doing whatever it takes to rebel against extinction. Winter, in a way, the parashah from which you'll be reading tomorrow morning is a response to that question. Can human beings do an about turn? Can they avert what may seem to be an inevitable catastrophe in the future. And as you know, the answer in your portion is yes, they can. The Israelites have escaped from Egypt after centuries of oppression, hard labor, and slavery. They depart in a great hurry and begin their journey towards freedom. But freedom is not so easily won, and as they retrace their steps in order to put Pharaoh off their scent, they find themselves between the Egyptian army, Pharaoh, of course, having changed his mind, and the sea. And terrified, they cry out to Moses, "Is not this the very thing we told you in Egypt, when we said, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness'?" Of course, we all know how that story continues, but it takes fearless leadership and profound courage to turn despair into hope and to turn around what seemed to be the inevitable consequences of defeat and death in the wilderness that had closed in on the Israelites. As a little epilogue to this story in this week's parashah, after the Israelites have crossed the sea on dry land, the Egyptians, of course, having drowned in the Sea of Reeds, they come to a place called Elim, where there are 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamp there beside the water. What's the significance of these 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees? Little reference there to Tu B'Shvat, which falls on Sunday night and Monday. New Year for trees. Rashi, quoting from the Midrash, associates the 12 springs of water with the 12 tribes, the clans who will settle in the land of Israel and be apportioned their particular territory. The 70 palm trees, he says, are a symbol of the 70 elders of the Sanhedrin, the court, the place of judicial, legal, and political functions. Nachmanides, the Spanish commentator of the 13th century, takes his interpretation a little further. "I know," he says, "of no other place in the Torah where the place of encampment by the Israelites in the desert is described at such length and in such detail. And the reason that Scripture tells us about these 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees is that each tribe encamped beside their spring, and the elders of Israel in their shade, praising God, because God had prepared such a restful place for them in a land of drought." It is the job of a rabbi to trust in humanity's better nature and to give hope for the future. But that is not enough. And so I must commend Don't Look Up to you, if you haven't seen it yet, for a necessary and much more strident and urgent message to all of us that fearless leadership, green investment, and continuous acts of ethical, environmental change are among the many things we can do to avert the extinction of the earth.